Hello and welcome to Lost Love Chronicles.
Dear listeners, before we get started, drop a quick hi in the comments and let us know where you're tuning in from. Also, if you have any suggestions for us to make the channel better, please let us know. Now let's start with the story. My parents threw away every photo of me and my dead brother. Then, 2 weeks before my 18th birthday, they handed me emancipation papers. When I asked why, my mom screamed, "Why couldn't it have been you in that car?" I just stood there, silent, numb. That was 3 months ago. Yesterday, she opened a letter, went completely still, and hasn't eaten since. But this all really started when I was just trying to find the stupid Christmas decorations in our garage. That was it. All I wanted was the stupid red and gold box Dad always labeled Zmaz lights. Instead, my whole world flipped. Tucked behind some dusty moving boxes, buried under a pile of old blankets, I found them, 2 black garbage bags. Heavy, sloppy duct tape along the top, like someone had sealed them in a hurry. Curiosity got the better of me. I tugged one open, and there they were, our photos. Me and Mitchell. Every birthday, every school play, every vacation. Torn, crumpled. Some even had marker lines slashed through them, across my face. Across his. Like trash. 3 years since the accident, and now I knew my parents weren't just grieving. They were erasing me. Erasing us. Systematically deleting any proof that I ever belonged here. Mitchell died in a car crash when he was 17. I was supposed to be with him that night. We were going to a late movie, but I had the flu, throwing up all day. I remember lying on the bathroom floor, pale and feverish, and telling him, "Go without me. I'll just slow you down." He ruffled my hair and said, "Your loss, loser." I'm getting popcorn. I never saw him again. Lucky me, right? Except it doesn't feel like luck when your parents look at you every day like you stole their real child's spot in the world. Mitchell was everything. Football captain. Honor roll. He got hugs in public. Applause at parent-teacher meetings. Mom cried when he got accepted into college. I remember her whispering, "My perfect boy." Me? I'm just the weird, quiet kid who draws too much and has panic attacks in the bathroom at school. Oh, and the punchline. My parents are both mental health professionals. Mom's a therapist. Dad runs grief support groups. Can you believe it? Sometimes I think, if they weren't my parents, maybe they'd actually help me. They refuse to pay for my therapy, say it's not necessary. So I work at a bookstore after school. Minimum wage. Just enough to cover one session every other week. I tell my therapist everything. She knows. She's the only one who knows. Last year, they had their miracle baby. IVF. A new beginning, they said. I called him Reset Baby in my head. A fresh start without reminders of the dead son, or the daughter who should have been in the car. One night, I heard Mom on the phone with Aunt Celia. I was coming down the stairs when I froze, her voice carrying through the kitchen. "It's so much easier now that we only have one child to worry about," she said. "It's like we can finally breathe again. One child. Baby Ewan. Not me." I'd already been erased in their minds. That night at dinner, I couldn't hold it in. The words came out before I even realized I was speaking. Why were our photos in the garbage? Mom dropped her fork. Her face crumpled instantly as she started sobbing. "I can't look at them anymore," she cried. "You have his eyes." Dad slammed his hand on the table. The dishes clattered. "Why do you always have to upset your mother?" he snapped. I didn't answer. I just sat there and stared at the mashed potatoes I'd lost my appetite for. 2 weeks later, they called a family meeting. The dining room table was covered in legal documents. Mom had this plastered-on smile like she was selling me something. "You're so mature, sweetie," she said, gently pushing the papers toward me. "Working and paying for your own therapy. We think it's time to make it official." Emancipation papers. They were literally kicking me out. But they framed it like they were doing me a favor. Dad folded his arms and said it with that same smug calm he always used when pretending he was being helpful. "You'll have more freedom for college prep." Mom nodded like she was proud of this solution. "Aunt Celia offered to help while you figure things out," she added, like this had all been thoughtfully arranged for my benefit. I looked down at the paperwork spread out in front of me, and then I saw it, Dad's will, sitting right there on the table beside the manila folder of emancipation forms. He didn't notice I was staring at it when he reached across for a pen. Everything was left to baby Ewan. 3 years after losing Mitchell, and I had been erased. Completely. I signed the papers with shaking hands. I don't know why. Maybe because I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing me cry. Maybe because I knew it didn't matter if I said no. They'd already made their decision. Just before I left, Mom handed me something. Mitchell's old backpack. "You should have this," she said, her voice tight. "I can't look at it anymore." I took it wordlessly. Later that night, I opened it. Inside was a card. The envelope had my name on it in Mitchell's messy handwriting. It was for my 14th birthday. He died 2 weeks before he could give it to me. My parents found it in his sock drawer and kept it hidden for 3 years. I sat on the floor, my knees pulled to my chest, and opened it with trembling fingers. To my favorite person in the world. Can't wait to watch you grow up. Love, your big brother. I broke. I ugly cried for hours that night, my body shaking with the kind of sobs that left me sore for days. They had me move out later that week. They said it would be easier that way, before Ewan's first birthday party. Because I was too much of a complication. Too much of a reminder. When I got to Aunt Celia's, I had one duffel bag, Mitchell's backpack, and the emancipation paperwork. She met me at the door, smiling warmly. There she is, she said. Ready for our college talk weekend. I didn't say anything. I just handed her the papers. Her smile faded. She started reading. Page after page. I watched the confusion on her face harden into something else. Rage. That manipulative bastard, she whispered. I blinked. What? He pulled this same crap when our dad died. She muttered, her jaw clenched. Then she stormed off into the kitchen and grabbed her phone. She called her friend Claire, a social worker. Claire came over within an hour. She sat across from me at the dining table and scanned everything, my signed emancipation papers, the will, even the old backpack. She didn't need long. This is textbook abandonment disguised as independence, she said flatly. They've been planning this. Aunt Celia didn't even hesitate. She pointed down the hallway. That's your room now, she said. You're home. No questions. I barely got a word out before the tears came again, but this time they were different. Softer. Safe. And then the truth started spilling out, like a broken dam I'd been patching up for years. They'd been lying to everyone, telling the family, neighbors, probably even their colleagues that I was troubled, that I'd been acting out ever since Mitchell died, that I wanted emancipation, that I needed space to find myself. They'd been crafting this lie for months. Meanwhile, I kept rereading Mitchell's birthday card over and over again. Each time, his words hit harder. So much pure love in just a few lines. From my big brother. While the people who raised us couldn't even stand to look at me. When I went back to get the rest of my things, I found it. A book draft. On the desk in Dad's office. Their upcoming book about grief and healing. 400 pages. I was mentioned twice. Their social media had already erased me. Every recent photo on their social media was of their perfect new family of 3. Smiling. Matching outfits. Baby Ewan front and center. I wasn't in a single one. So I started documenting everything. Claire helped me organize it. Texts, emails, statements. My therapist guided me in writing a letter to my extended family. Just facts. No drama. Just the truth. I'd been emancipated and kicked out. I wasn't away finding myself. I'd been discarded. When my boss at the bookstore found out, she pulled me aside after my shift. Her voice was soft, but firm. We can give you full-time hours, Loren, if you want them. I almost cried again, but this time, it was gratitude. Then the call started. My letter reached people. Uncles, cousins, even grandma. Family began asking questions. Why wasn't Loren at Christmas? Why didn't we know about this sooner? People who were supposed to go to Ewan's birthday party started backing out. Not without Loren, they said. My parents panicked. Their stories started unraveling, contradicting each other. Dates didn't line up. Reasons shifted. Then, one afternoon, they showed up at Aunt Celia's doorstep. I was in my room when I heard the knock, followed by raised voices. I stepped into the hallway, just in time to see Mom's eyes dart toward me. Aunt Celia stood firm, one hand braced against the doorframe. You're not getting near her, she snapped. That's when Mom finally cracked. Her face twisted, voice rising into a screech. Why couldn't it have been you in that car? The whole block must have heard. I didn't cry. I didn't scream back. I just stared at her. The woman who gave birth to me. Who once held my hand when I had nightmares. And now she was wishing I'd died instead of her son. The next morning, I woke up to 47 missed calls from Mom. But it was Dad's single text that made my blood freeze. We know what you told them. Come home now, or we'll make sure everyone knows the truth about the accident. The threat sat there, glowing on my screen like poison. I stared at it, hands trembling. What truth? There was no secret. I had the flu. I stayed home. Mitchell went to the party alone. He never came back. There wasn't anything else. But if there was, I didn't know it. Aunt Celia found me 20 minutes later, sitting on her porch steps, still in my pajamas, still holding the phone. Loren, she said gently. I didn't answer. She came and sat beside me, her voice low. Show me. I handed her the phone with shaking fingers. Her jaw clenched as she read. That manipulative piece of, she caught herself. Pack a bag. We're going to see Grandma. The drive took 2 hours. Aunt Celia made 3 phone calls on the way. Each one louder, sharper, angrier. I sat quietly in the passenger seat, watching trees blur past the window. But I heard bits of what she said. Threatening a minor. Documented abandonment. He won't get away with this. When we pulled into Grandma's driveway, the porch lights were already on. Her house smelled like cinnamon rolls and safety. She opened the door, took one look at me, and didn't ask a single question. She just pulled me into a hug, tight and warm. "I've been waiting for you to come to me," she whispered. We sat at her kitchen table. Aunt Celia did the explaining. I couldn't speak. With each detail, I watched Grandma's face grow harder, more still. When Aunt Celia read Dad's text aloud, Grandma stood up without a word and disappeared down the hallway. She returned with a thick manila folder in her arms. "I've been keeping track since Mitchell's funeral," she said, flipping it open. Inside were printed emails, screenshots, photographs. She looked at me and said, "Your father has always been a manipulator. I watched him do it to your grandfather. I wasn't going to let him do it to you." The first page made my stomach turn. An email from Mom to her sister, dated 2 years ago. "We're considering our options with Lorraine. She's becoming too difficult. The constant reminder is destroying our marriage." 2 years ago. They've been planning to get rid of me for 2 years. Grandma flipped to another page. Bank statements. They showed college funds, ones that should have been split between Mitchell and me, being slowly drained. All the money had been redirected into accounts with only their names. Then Grandma pulled out the final document. Her hand trembled slightly. "This," she said, "is what made me take action." It was a social media post. A private one, from a grief support group Dad moderated. "Our daughter has been spreading lies about the night our son died. She's claiming she was sick, but we know she convinced him to go alone because she didn't want to deal with his friends. The guilt is eating her alive, and she's lashing out at us." The timestamp? Last week. Right before they kicked me out. Before any of this exploded, before I found out what they were really saying, I only knew pieces. "They're telling people I called him," I whispered. Grandma's eyes narrowed. "They're telling people a lot of things," she said grimly, resting a hand on mine. "But I've been telling people the truth." My phone buzzed. A text from my cousin Samantha. "Just heard what your parents are saying at Ewan's party prep, that you were hammered and convinced Mitchell to stay home so you wouldn't get caught." What the hell? I froze. Hammered? I was 14. I had the flu. I'd been curled up in a blanket on the couch, burning up, while Mom gave me medicine and checked my temperature every 2 hours. The phone buzzed again. And again. More texts. "Cousins. Aunts. Uncles. They're saying you were supposed to be the designated driver. That you made Mitchell go alone. That you were drinking at home. That you didn't want to deal with his friends." Each version was worse than the last. I held my phone out to Grandma with trembling fingers. "They're at Ewan's party prep right now." She stood up, straightened her shoulders. "Good. Then we know where to find them." The drive to the community center was quiet, tense. My stomach twisted into knots. Balloons and streamers fluttered outside as we pulled in. The parking lot was full. Extended family from 3 different states had shown up for Ewan's first birthday. Inside, I could hear it, Mom's laugh. Bright. Forced. Fake. We stepped through the doors. Grandma in the middle. Aunt Celia on one side. Me on the other. Everything stopped. Conversations cut off. Balloons bobbed in the air. Dozens of eyes turned toward us. Mom's face went pale. Dad stepped forward, stiff-jawed. "Mother, this isn't the time." "Sit down, Reuben," Grandma said, her voice like steel. No one argued. They knew that voice. The one that had raised 4 kids and buried a husband. That voice didn't waver. She walked to the center of the room, turned to face the entire family. The murmurs were starting, people trying to piece together what was about to happen. "I've been listening to the stories being spread about my granddaughter," Grandma began. "About the night my grandson died. And I think it's time everyone heard the truth." Mom started to cry, soft and shaking, like it would distract. Dad opened his mouth, but Grandma silenced them both with a single look. She turned to the crowd. "Lorraine had the flu that night. I know because I was on the phone with her mother at 8 p.m. Then she turned directly to Mom. Her eyes didn't blink. "You told me her fever had spiked to 103. You were debating whether to take her to urgent care." The room shifted. Chairs scraped. People murmured. "I have the phone records," Grandma continued, voice steady. "I have the urgent care discharge papers from the next morning when her fever wouldn't break. I have the prescription receipts. I have everything." She pulled out her phone, opened it with practiced hands. "Here are the text messages from that night. You, updating me about her condition. Here, photos of Lorraine passed out on the couch, clearly sick. And here, her urgent care bracelet with a timestamp." She held it up so everyone could see. "So I want to know," her voice rose, "why my son and daughter-in-law are telling people their 14-year-old daughter was hammered. Why they're saying she convinced her brother to go alone. Why they're blaming a child for a tragic accident that had nothing to do with her." Silence. The kind that sinks into your bones. Then Uncle Christopher stood up. "We were told she's been troubled since the accident. Acting out. That she wanted to be emancipated." Aunt Celia didn't miss a beat. "They abandoned her," she said flatly. "They threw away every photo of her and Mitchell together. They wrote her out of the will. They kicked her out 2 weeks before she turned 18 because they didn't want her at this party. That's not. Dad started. I have the papers, I said quietly. Everyone turned to look at me. The emancipation papers, I said, my voice clearer now. The ones you made me sign. The ones you said were for my benefit. I stepped forward, my hands trembling, but I kept going. The will I saw on the dining table, where everything went to Ewan. The book draft, 400 pages about grief and healing. I mentioned twice. A gasp came from the back. It was Farah's mom. You wrote a book about grief and didn't include your living daughter. She's troubled, Mom said weakly. She needed space to heal. She needed parents, Grandma snapped. She needed support. She needed therapy, which you refused to pay for, despite both being mental health professionals. Dad tried again, his voice tight. We offered. You offered nothing. I cut in, stronger now. I worked 30 hours a week to pay for therapy. You haven't bought me groceries in a year. I felt the words pour out, each one sharper than the last. You had a baby to replace both of us. And when that wasn't enough, you decided to erase me completely. Don't be dramatic, Mom muttered. I reached into my bag and pulled out Mitchell's birthday card. My fingers trembled as I unfolded it. I found this in his backpack. I said, my voice cracking. You kept this for me for 3 years. The last thing my brother ever wrote to me. I swallowed hard and read it aloud. To my favorite person in the world. Can't wait to watch you grow up. Love, your big brother. I looked up, meeting their eyes. You hid it from me because you couldn't stand the thought that he loved me. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Aunt Claire stepped forward, a folder tucked under her arm. I've been helping Loren navigate this professionally, she said, her tone calm but direct. What I've observed constitutes emotional abuse and abandonment. And now, the lies you're spreading about her role in Mitchell's death? That's beyond reprehensible. The room exploded. Relatives shouted over one another, some defending my parents, others in disbelief. Voices rose. Fingers pointed. Baby Ewan started crying in his high chair. But through it all, Grandma didn't move. She stood like a rock. And when the noise finally died down, she spoke again. I've made some decisions. She turned to my parents, her eyes hard. Reuben, Penelope, you've shown me exactly who you are. And how you treat your daughter tells me how you'll treat Ewan when he doesn't live up to your expectations. She reached into her bag and pulled out a thick envelope. I've changed my will, she said. You are both excluded entirely. Mom gasped. Loren will receive her fair share, as will Ewan, but through a trust. Managed by Celia. You won't touch a penny. Mom burst into tears, real ones this time. Her shoulders shook. Dad's face flushed deep purple. You can't do this, he spat. I can, Grandma said calmly. And I have. My lawyer has already filed the changes. She looked around the room, eyes scanning every face. I've also instructed him to monitor any attempts at defamation against Loren. If these lies continue, we will pursue legal action. She turned back to the crowd. And anyone who chooses to believe their lies over documented evidence, you're welcome to leave. She stepped closer to me. This party, she said clearly, is now a celebration of truth. And a welcome home for my granddaughter. The room split. Some relatives left with my parents, faces tight with discomfort or blind loyalty. But others, Samantha, her parents, Uncle Christopher, stayed. Uncle Christopher came over, slowly. He looked me in the eyes. I'm sorry, he said. I should have questioned the story. I should have asked. I nodded. That was enough. Across the room, my parents were gathering Ewan's things in silence. As they turned to leave, Mom looked back at me one last time. I hope you're happy, she hissed. You've destroyed this family. I met her gaze, steady. No, I said. You destroyed it the day you decided I was expendable. I straightened my shoulders, my voice unshaking now. I just refused to disappear quietly. They left, taking my baby brother with them. My heart broke, not for them, but for Ewan. He was innocent. A pawn in a story he didn't ask to be part of. I stood there, watching their backs as they disappeared out the doors. Then Grandma's hand found mine, warm and steady. The trust is ironclad, she whispered, leaning in so only I could hear. They can't touch his money. And Celia will make sure he knows the truth when he's older. You haven't lost him forever. Something in me unclenched at that. Maybe not today. Maybe not for a long time. But I hadn't lost him completely. The party continued after they left. Smaller, quieter, but real. People came up to me throughout the afternoon, relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. Some with tears in their eyes, others with shame in their voices. I'm so sorry, Loren. We didn't know. We should have asked. Mitchell talked about you all the time. They shared their memories of him. Welcomed me back like I'd been missing, not forgotten. And maybe that was true. Maybe I'd just been hidden, tucked away under their lies. That night, on the drive back to Grandma's, Aunt Celia reached across the center console and squeezed my hand. You did good today, she said, voice quiet in the dark. Mitchell would be proud. I didn't answer right away. I was thinking about the card still folded in my pocket. Thinking about my brother, about how he'd seen me, really seen me. About how, for the first time in years, the truth was finally out in the open. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. I still had therapy, still had nightmares, still had to figure out how to build a life without parents. But I had Grandma. I had Aunt Celia. I had the truth. And somehow, that felt like enough. Enough to begin. The weeks after the party were a strange mix of relief and chaos. The confrontation had opened floodgates, some welcome, some not. My phone turned into a war zone of messages. Relatives who had walked out with my parents now began reaching back out, asking questions they should have asked years ago. Aunt Celia helped me stay grounded. She set up a small desk in my room, complete with folders, a lamp, even a little corkboard. "This is your space," she said. "Use it." I did. I sorted through everything. Bank statements, emails, screenshots of their social media lies. Years of my parents building a picture-perfect narrative while methodically erasing me behind the scenes. Reading it all made my chest hurt. They hadn't just reacted to grief. They'd planned my removal like it was a strategy, like I was a mistake they could just delete. My shifts at the bookstore became my anchor. Mrs. Corbin, my boss, was incredible. Since I told her what happened, she'd adjusted my schedule around therapy appointments. She even let me study for my GED in the back during quiet hours. The place smelled like old paper and fresh coffee. It grounded me. Here, I wasn't the troubled daughter. I was just Lorraine. 3 days after the party, Samantha showed up. She looked as tired as I felt, dark circles under her eyes, her ponytail falling out like she'd been running on fumes. I was on break. We sat together in the back room, 2 mugs of tea steaming between us. She wrapped her hands around hers like it was the only thing keeping her together. "They're doubling down," she said. I didn't even have to ask who they were. "Your mom called mine crying," she went on. "Said you've turned everyone against them. That you manipulated Grandma into changing her will." I let out a dry laugh. Bitter, right? Because a 17-year-old has that kind of power over Grandma. Samantha gave a small smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "That's what I said. But they're telling everyone who will listen that you've been planning this since Mitchell died." My breath caught. She looked down, then back up, her voice lower now. "They're saying you were jealous of him." The accusation hit like a punch to the chest. Jealous? Of course I'd been jealous sometimes. Mitchell was. Mitchell. Golden. Talented. Loved. He made things look easy, friends, grades, football, life. And me? I was the weird one. The quiet one. The one who doodled in the margins and flinched at loud noises. I got panic attacks. Mitchell got trophies. But I had never wanted to replace him. I had never wanted him gone. I loved him. He was my protector. My best friend. The only person who never made me feel like I wasn't enough. I blinked hard, trying to swallow the lump in my throat. Samantha reached across the table and touched my arm. "I know it's not true," she said quietly, "but I thought you should know what they're saying." I nodded once. "Thanks." She hesitated. "They're also saying Aunt Celia coached you. That she's using you to get revenge on your dad because he was always the favorite child." The words made my stomach twist, but not with doubt, just disbelief. I pictured Aunt Celia setting up a desk in my room, baking lasagna from scratch even when she was exhausted from work, staying up late with me on the nights I couldn't sleep. The idea that she was manipulating me was absurd. She hadn't gained anything from helping me. She'd only lost peace, lost time, lost distance from the family drama she'd been trying to escape. But I could see how my parents would spin it. They were so good at shaping their own version of reality. They wore grief like armor, used their credentials like weapons. That evening, Aunt Celia and I had dinner with Claire, the social worker who'd been guiding us through this chaos. We sat at her tiny kitchen table, the smell of lentil soup in the air, sunlight fading through the windows. Claire set down her spoon and looked at me gently. "I have some news, Lorraine." My heart immediately started pounding. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder, but didn't open it yet. "Your parents have been reaching out to family services," she said slowly. "They're claiming you're a runaway being manipulated by your relatives." I stared at her. "What?" My voice cracked. "But I'm emancipated." "They signed the papers." Claire nodded. "Which is exactly why their claim won't go anywhere. The legal process is on your side." She paused. "But it shows they're escalating. They're trying to reframe the narrative by involving outside authorities." Aunt Celia's jaw clenched. "What do we need to do?" Claire opened the folder. Inside were forms, logs, printouts. "Document everything," she said. "Every message, every call, every time they show up." I've already spoken with the caseworker assigned to review their claim. She's interested in why 2 mental health professionals forced their minor child to seek emancipation. That irony wasn't lost on me. My parents, the healers, were now being investigated for hurting their own child. Dad, who ran support groups for grieving parents, had been telling those same people that his living daughter caused his son's death. Mom, who counseled families through trauma, had been actively traumatizing me since the day Mitchell died. The next few weeks were careful, methodical, a dance of distance and documentation. They kept trying. First it was calls, then voicemails, then texts. Then they started showing up. They came to the bookstore twice. The first time, I was in the back when Mrs. Corbin intercepted them. She later told me they claimed they were just checking on me. The second time, she didn't hesitate. She calmly told them they were trespassing, and when they wouldn't leave, she called the police. They were escorted out in front of customers. I was mortified, but Mrs. Corbin just said, "No one harasses my staff. Not even parents." Then they tried the school, apparently not realizing I'd withdrawn after the emancipation to focus on my GED. The secretary, confused, called Aunt Celia. "Why are these people trying to access Lauren's records?" she asked. "She's no longer enrolled." Each attempt was logged. Each lie, recorded. Claire helped us piece it all into a master timeline. Calls, texts, emails, in-person visits. The pattern was undeniable. Then, one afternoon, Aunt Celia got a call. She was in the kitchen, making tea, when her phone rang. I watched her expression change as she answered. "Christopher," she said, "is everything okay?" There was a pause. Then her brows drew together. "You what? Where?" Her tone turned sharp, controlled, but with an edge I recognized. When she hung up, she looked at me and said, "That was Uncle Christopher. He was at a professional conference and ran into one of your dad's colleagues." She set the phone down slowly. From the Grief Support Network. Uncle Christopher had barely finished explaining before Aunt Celia was dialing Grandma. He'd been at a professional conference when one of Dad's colleagues pulled him aside. "Ruben's been telling us about his daughter for months," the man had said. "But the story keeps changing. First she was troubled but getting help. Then she was refusing help. Then she was spreading lies about the accident. Now apparently, she's been kidnapped by family members." Even Dad's professional community was starting to raise eyebrows. The cracks were showing. Uncle Christopher had passed the colleague Grandma's number. Told him, "You might want to hear the other side of things." Grandma, meanwhile, had become a force of nature. For decades, she'd played the part, quiet, warm, always hosting holidays, sending handwritten birthday cards. But now, she was done being silent. She picked up the phone, reached out to every relative in the family tree, armed with documentation, dates, and a grandmother's fury. And it was working. The divide in the family deepened, but it wasn't neat, wasn't clean like my parents had probably hoped. People who'd once sided with them began asking real questions. Why didn't they mention Loren was emancipated? Why is the story of the accident different every time? Why would they hide Mitchell's birthday card for 3 years? And there were no good answers. Meanwhile, therapy got heavy. I had Dr. Martinez now, a soft-spoken woman with eyes that saw too much, but judged nothing. We weren't just talking about grief anymore. We were talking about erasure. About what it meant to be the child left behind, and then blamed for staying. Your parents' grief twisted into something toxic, Dr. Martinez said during one session. You became the repository for all their pain and guilt. I stared at the tissue in my hand. They needed someone to blame. She nodded. The randomness of losing a child is unbearable for some people. If they can blame you, then there's a reason, a cause, something they can point to and say, "That's why it happened." That makes the pain feel containable. But I was sick. I said for what felt like the 100th time. I had the flu. There's proof. Facts don't matter, Dr. Martinez said gently, when someone is trying to survive their own pain. She paused, then added, "Your parents are mental health professionals who can't face their own mental health. The cognitive dissonance must be excruciating." That stayed with me. They had all the right language, all the right tools, books, studies, professional communities. But none of it had saved them. And worse, none of it had saved me. They knew how to talk about healing, but not how to do it. They were stuck. In grief. In blame. In denial. And they'd rather lose their living daughter than admit that sometimes terrible things just happen. Then things exploded. Again. Grandma got a letter in the mail, a cease and desist from my parents' lawyer. They accused her of defaming them. Said she was spreading malicious lies about how they'd treated me. Demanded she stop contacting family members. Ordered her to retract her statements about the will. Grandma read it over dinner at her house. She didn't even flinch. "Well," she said, folding the letter and setting it down next to the potatoes, "that settles it." She looked across the table at Aunt Celia and me. "I'm hiring a lawyer." Aunt Celia raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" Grandma's eyes didn't waver. "They want to play legal games? Fine." She stood, walked to her office, and came back minutes later with a thick binder full of neatly organized tabs. I've been documenting their behavior for 3 years, she said, flipping through it with practiced fingers. Emails where Ruben claimed Loren caused Mitchell's death. Social media posts calling her manipulative and unstable. Every lie they've told about the accident. Every contradiction. Every smear. She shut the binder with a quiet snap. Let's see how they like having their own methods used against them. The lawyer Grandma hired wasn't just good, he was relentless. His response to my parents' cease and desist didn't just reject their demands, it flipped the mirror back onto them. Every claim they'd made was answered with receipts. Screenshots of Dad's post to the grief support group, highlighted in yellow. Line by line, he pointed out the shifting narrative, the blatant lies about my role in Mitchell's death. I read the letter 3 times. It felt like someone had finally stood up for me on paper. Like my truth was something that could be held up and measured. But my parents didn't back down. They escalated. They started a blog about parental alienation. The header was a soft blue banner with a stock photo of a broken family silhouette beneath a sunset. Like a grief counseling pamphlet. They never used my name, just kept saying our surviving child. But anyone who knew the story could connect the dots. Anyone who knew me could see right through it. Each post was more painful than the last. They painted themselves as victims. Brave, broken parents who'd lost not 1 but 2 children. One to a tragic accident, the other to manipulative relatives with a vendetta. They wrote about how their daughter refused to come home. How she'd been poisoned against them. How it felt to watch her disappear. They twisted everything. The emancipation they forced on me became me abandoning them. The photos they'd thrown in the trash were suddenly too painful to display. The birthday card they'd hidden for 3 years? Oh, now that was something they were waiting for the right time to share. I wanted to scream. Claire helped us document every post. She even tracked the IP address. It led back to Dad's office computer. So while he was supposedly counseling grieving families, he was also writing thinly veiled fiction, painting me as a monster. A manipulative, cold daughter who'd betrayed them in their time of need. The breaking point came with that post. The one where they rewrote the night Mitchell died. According to them, I'd been difficult. I'd refused to go with him. I'd made excuses. They didn't say it outright, but the implication was crystal clear. My selfishness sent him to that party alone. My selfishness got him killed. I threw up after reading it. I didn't even make it to the sink, just collapsed on the bathroom floor, shaking, the taste of bile in my throat, my whole body trembling. The guilt, years of it, rushed back like a flood. Even with the urgent care paperwork. Even with Mom's texts from that night, updating the family on my fever. Even with all the proof in the world. Their words burrowed under my skin like poison. Aunt Celia found me there, curled on the tile, sobbing so hard I couldn't speak. She knelt beside me and wrapped her arms around me, rocking slightly. They're trying to break you, she whispered fiercely. They want you to come crawling back. To accept their version of what happened. To play the troubled child they've cast you as. I shook my head against her shoulder, gasping. But I'm not that. No, she said. You're not. Because I wasn't. I was the girl who'd survived the death of her best friend. Her brother. I was the girl who'd been abandoned by the people who should have loved her unconditionally. I was the one working 30 hours a week, scraping together therapy sessions, studying for my GED. I was the one healing, while they wrote stories. And that night, Grandma had had enough. She called a family meeting. Not everyone showed up, but enough did. We sat in Grandma's living room. The fireplace cold. The tension hotter than anything. Grandma stood in front of the room, calm but fierce. She laid it all out. The blog posts. The legal threats. The changing narratives. The timeline Claire had helped build. Pages and pages of manipulation and abandonment. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. I need you all to understand, she said, eyes locked on the room. This isn't about taking sides in some family dispute. This is about protecting a child who has been systematically abused by the people who were supposed to love her. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Others stared at the floor. Uncle Christopher stood up then. His face was pale, jaw clenched. I've done my own digging, he said. He looked straight at me. After what I saw at the conference, I needed answers. I swallowed. He took a breath. So I reached out to Mitchell's friends from high school. My pulse quickened. The ones who'd been at the party that night. Every single one of Mitchell's friends confirmed it. I'd been supposed to go that night, but I was too sick. One of them, Jonah, even still had the text from Mitchell. He pulled them up and showed Uncle Christopher. Guess I'm the only sober one tonight faced with tears of joy. My DD is home dying of the plague. That was me. His designated driver. His little sister, stuck at home with the flu. The evidence wasn't just strong, it was overwhelming. But my parents, they couldn't accept it. Not now. Not after everything they'd built. Admitting the truth would mean unraveling 3 years of carefully curated lies. It would mean admitting they'd thrown me away on purpose. So they did what they always did when the walls started closing in. They doubled down. They started showing up at family events. Ones they never used to care about. Ones they knew I'd be at. It started with cousin Far's graduation party. I didn't even see her coming. Mom cornered me in the bathroom. Her eyes were red, cheeks streaked with mascara, breath catching like she was about to collapse from grief. She grabbed my hands. "We can fix this," she whispered, clutching at my fingers like I was a lifeline. "Just tell everyone you were confused. That you misunderstood. We'll go to family therapy, we'll work through it." I pulled away. "With you as the therapist?" My voice was quieter than I expected. "Mom, you need help. Real help. Not the performance you do for everyone else." I watched the shift happen in real time. Her face hardened. The tears dried up like they were never there. And then she hissed, "You always were jealous of him. Maybe you didn't convince him to go alone, but you were glad when he died. It meant you could finally be the only child." It was so cruel, so deliberate, I almost laughed. But my chest hurt too much. That was the real her. Not the therapist. Not the grief expert. Just a mother who would tear into her own daughter to avoid facing her pain. I left the bathroom without another word. Found Aunt Celia in the crowd and told her we had to go. We slipped out quietly, but not before several family members saw Mom following behind, still crying for the audience, still playing the grieving mother for anyone watching. After that, the blog posts intensified. Dad started writing about false memory syndrome, how trauma could make children misremember events, how well-meaning but misguided relatives could plant ideas and reshape memories. He used clinical terms and psychology buzzwords like armor. It sounded so official, so researched, like he was sharing wisdom, not spinning lies. It was brilliant, in the cruelest way. If you didn't know the full story, if you'd never seen the evidence, you might have believed him. But we had something they didn't. We had the truth. Documented. Verified. Witnessed by family. Supported by 3 years of records showing emotional abuse, abandonment, manipulation. Still, the war of narratives only escalated. They gave interviews to grief support podcasts, always dancing around specifics, never naming me, of course, but carefully crafting a picture of grieving parents destroyed by family interference. Then came the support group. They started one for parents experiencing alienation. Used their credentials to draw people in. Dad with his grief seminars. Mom with her therapy license. Each new move was met with careful documentation. Claire connected us with a family law attorney who specialized in defamation. Everything, the blog posts, podcast clips, even the support group handouts, was being cataloged. Proof of an active campaign. To damage my name. To undermine my healing. To tear down the person I was trying to become. The extended family, meanwhile, was worn down. Tired of the emails. The divided holidays. The unspoken tension in every shared room. Some relatives just bowed out. Stopped replying to messages. Didn't come to gatherings. Others chose sides. Not necessarily based on facts. Not necessarily based on who was telling the truth. The family that once gathered for every holiday, every birthday, every milestone, was splintering. And not quietly. The lines had been drawn, some obvious, some jagged, and I didn't know if any of them would ever fully heal. There were cousins I hadn't heard from in months. Uncles and aunts who used to send yearly birthday cards now sent nothing at all. People were picking silence over sides. But even through all of that, I had something solid. My core. Grandma. Fierce, unwavering, protective in a way I hadn't realized a person could be. Aunt Celia, who had turned her guest room into my room, and her kitchen into a place I could breathe again. Claire, donating her time, her expertise, and probably half her sanity helping us navigate the legal maze my parents kept throwing at us. Dr. Martinez, my therapist, who sat with me through the sobs and the silences, guiding me through the dense forest of trauma I hadn't even known I'd been living in. Mrs. Corbin, who made sure I had hours at the bookstore, stability, and even a place to decompress when the rest of the world felt too loud. The irony was sharp. The more my parents pushed the idea that I was troubled and brainwashed, the more people stood beside me. Not because I begged them to, but because they saw it. They saw me. Every lie my parents launched became an opportunity for someone else, someone real, to speak truth. Every attempt to cut me off just made the connections I had grow stronger. More honest. More earned. As summer shifted into fall, a strange stillness settled over everything. Not peace, never that, but a pause. An uneasy equilibrium. My parents kept performing. Grieving. Alienated. Pained. Still posting. Still podcasting. Still convincing strangers that they'd been torn from their daughter by evil, vindictive family members. And I kept living. I studied for my GED. I clocked in at the bookstore. I set aside money for community college. I went to therapy. I healed in ways they either couldn't or refused to. The trust Grandma had set up was solid. Legally locked. Ewan and I would both have what we needed, especially him. And if nothing else came of this war, At least I knew that when he grew up and started asking questions, the truth would be there. Black and white. Documented. Undeniable. I still held on to hope that someday, when Ewan was old enough to pull at threads and realize things didn't add up, he'd come looking for the truth. And when he did, I'd be ready. Not with bitterness, but with facts. With love. With Mitchell's card. But the truth didn't come free. It cost family dinners. It cost old relationships. It cost a version of myself I could never go back to. The family albums that once held decades of laughter now had empty spaces. People cut out, photos removed. My own face missing from memories I had lived. And still, I wouldn't change a thing. I'd made the decision to stand up. To stop playing along with a narrative that painted me as the villain in a tragedy that devastated all of us. Letting them twist Mitchell's death into something to use against me. Pretending I'd chosen to leave when they'd handed me those papers and packed up my life. That would have destroyed something deeper than any family feud ever could me. As Mitchell's 21st birthday approached, I pulled his card out again. To my favorite person in the world. Can't wait to watch you grow up. Love, your big brother. He never got to see who I became. But I was determined to become someone he'd be proud of. Not the girl my parents painted in their sob stories and blog posts. Not the troubled child. The survivor. The one still standing. The one doing the work. The one telling the truth. They hadn't stopped. My parents were still locked in their version of reality. Still rewriting history with every microphone they could find. But I had something they never would. I could face the truth. Live with it. Grow from it. And every day that I got stronger, every therapy session, every moment of quiet connection with someone who truly loved me, I felt it. That girl who found those garbage bags full of photos in the garage. She was gone. In her place stood someone harder. Sadder maybe, but unbreakable. They tried to erase me. Instead, they forged me into someone who would never be made invisible again. The war for the family narrative wasn't over. But I was no longer fighting alone. The truth had its own power. And time had a way of dragging hidden things into the light. That thought stayed with me as I poured cereal the morning after Mitchell's birthday, the card still tucked safely in the drawer of my nightstand. I heard Aunt Celia's voice before I even stepped out of my room. Sharp, clipped, her usual calm edge gone. By the time I made it to the kitchen, she was hanging up. "That was your Uncle Christopher," she said, rubbing her temples. "Your parents showed up at his house. 6 a.m. I froze, spoon halfway to my mouth. They were demanding he convince Grandma to reverse the will changes. Of course, desperation was starting to smell like smoke, bitter, spreading. He recorded the whole thing. Aunt Celia went on, her voice tightening. "Your dad even threatened to expose some business deal from 20 years ago if Christopher didn't help. Your mom just stood there, crying about how everyone's turned against them." Before I could say anything, the doorbell rang. We both looked at each other. Froze. Through the peephole, I saw a woman standing there. Business clothes. Clipboard in hand. Aunt Celia opened the door slowly. "Process server," the woman said, then handed over an envelope. "You've been served." My stomach dropped. I watched Aunt Celia read. Her face didn't move at first. Then her hands began to shake. "They're contesting Grandma's mental capacity," she said, voice flat. "Claiming she's been manipulated due to age-related cognitive decline." It took me a second to process the words. My parents were trying to undo the will by pretending Grandma wasn't in her right mind. The same woman who had documented their every move for years. Within the hour, we were at Grandma's house. Claire was already there, along with Mr. Harrison, the family lawyer. Grandma sat at the dining room table, reading through the legal filing. Her expression never flinched. "They want to play dirty," she said, calm as ever. "Then let's show them what prepared looks like." Mr. Harrison opened his briefcase and laid out a neat spread of documents. "I anticipated this move," he said. "Your grandmother underwent a comprehensive cognitive evaluation 6 months ago when she first came to me about the will." He held up a report with a notarized seal. Perfect scores across the board. Grandma, unbothered, reached for another folder. "I also had 2 witnesses present for every signing," she said, matter of fact. "Both are willing to testify to my mental clarity." Claire slid a file across the table. "I've been keeping professional notes on all interactions," she said. "Their pattern of behavior actually strengthens the case for why the will changes were necessary." Right then, my phone buzzed. A message from Samantha. "Emergency. Check your mom's Facebook." I opened the app, and what I saw made me go cold. My mother had posted an old photo of Mitchell and me. We were so young in it. He had his arm around my shoulder, and we were laughing at something off camera. But the caption beneath it was something else entirely. She wrote about losing both her children. One to death, one to family manipulation. She painted herself as a mother shattered by betrayal, a martyr in mourning. And then came the comments. Condolences poured in. Sympathies. Prayers. And she, my mother, replied to them by sharing supposed details about my mental health, twisting every therapy session, fabricating episodes, calling me unstable, dangerous. Claire looked over my shoulder. She's violating HIPAA, she said, her voice low and tight. As a licensed therapist, she can't share false mental health information about you publicly. She paused, looked me in the eye. Even if you're her daughter. Mr. Harrison immediately began documenting the posts. This is defamation and professional misconduct, he said, voice steady but cold. We need to report this to the licensing board. The next few days were a blur of legal calls, paperwork, folders spread across tables like evidence in a crime drama. It felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life unfold, but no, it was mine. Their attempt to challenge Grandma's mental capacity had blown up in their faces. Not only did we have that cognitive evaluation from 6 months ago, but the whole filing reeked of panic. Anyone with half a brain could see it for what it was, desperation. Uncle Christopher showed up with a flash drive. I've been recording every interaction with them since the party, he said quietly, placing it on the table. I felt guilty at first, but after what they tried to pull at my house, I'm done protecting them. We listened to the files together, Dad's voice, low and tired, admitting they needed the inheritance to cover debts. Mom's words, calculated and cruel, discussing how to spin the narrative, how to discredit me. Them talking about how to cut off my support systems. My stomach twisted hearing it, but I also felt something steadier take root. Validation. Then came the call from Aunt Linda, Farah's mom. I just got off the phone with 3 other parents from your dad's grief support group, she said. They're comparing notes. The stories he tells about you? They change depending on who he's talking to. The house of cards was toppling. Dad's group members began cross-referencing. Things didn't add up. Mom's therapy practice started getting inquiries, some polite, some furious, about her social media posts. The professional facades they'd spent years curating were beginning to crack. And then came the settlement conference. Grandma's lawyer, Mr. Harrison, had requested it to avoid dragging this into a full legal trial. I sat stiffly between Grandma and Aunt Celia in the conference room. Across from us, my parents and their attorney. They wouldn't even look at me. Mom's eyes were puffy, hair unbrushed, lips trembling. Dad's shoulders slumped. The man who once dominated every room with ease now looked like a balloon slowly losing air. Their lawyer started. My clients are willing to drop the competency challenge if Mrs. Patterson agrees to restore them to the will. Grandma let out a sharp laugh. Counteroffer, she said coolly. They drop everything. Stop all defamation. And agree to a no-contact order with Loren. In return, I won't pursue professional misconduct charges that would end both their careers. Mom gasped. Dad's face went pale. Mr. Harrison didn't flinch. He slid a thick folder across the table. The evidence is comprehensive, he said. Social media violations, ethics breaches, false reporting, emotional abuse of a minor while operating as licensed professionals. You're bluffing, Dad muttered, but his voice cracked. Page 12, Mr. Harrison said without missing a beat. Your grief group post blaming Loren for Mitchell's death. Page 18, your wife's Facebook comments diagnosing her daughter with conditions she was never evaluated for. Page 24, the recording where you admit to fabricating events from the night of the accident. Silence. All you could hear was the sound of pages being turned. Their lawyer's face darkened with every line he read. Finally, he set the folder down, his hands folded tightly. We need a moment with our clients. They shuffled out, and we waited in the lobby. Aunt Celia squeezed my hand. Grandma sat tall, her hands folded in her lap. Claire tapped away silently on her phone, documenting it all. I just stared at the floor, numb but steady. 20 minutes later, we were called back in. Mom's face was streaked with tears. Dad didn't raise his eyes. My clients agreed to all terms, their lawyer said quietly. No contact with Loren. No further defamation. They'll sign whatever is necessary to ensure the trust remains intact. Mr. Harrison nodded once. And the blog? He asked. Delete, the lawyer said. He looked over at them. Delete, he repeated. Delete, delete, delete. There was a finality in his voice, like a judge slamming a gavel. Deleted within 24 hours, he confirmed. The lawyer confirmed all posts. The paperwork took another hour, restraining orders, cease and desist agreements, affidavits acknowledging the trust validity. Each signature felt like another wall going up between us, but this time the walls weren't there to trap me. They were protection, a boundary I had every right to enforce. We were packing up to leave when Mom's voice broke through the silence. I need to say something. Everyone tensed. Her lawyer opened his mouth, but she waved him off. I know you won't believe me, she said. I was finally meeting mine for the first time in what felt like forever, but I loved Mitchell. And I loved you. Her voice cracked. I broke when he died. And instead of facing that break, I let it weaken everything. Dad didn't speak. He stared down at the table, jaw tight, unmoving. That doesn't excuse anything. Mom continued, tears now falling freely. I became someone monstrous. I see that now. The things we did. The lies we told, there's no justification. I felt like I couldn't breathe. My voice came out thin and shaky. Then what? Mom blinked. What? Why did you throw our pictures away? Why did you hide his card? Why did you try to erase me? Her sob wasn't performative this time. It was raw. Because you lived, she said, barely getting the words out. And every time I saw you, I saw him. And every time I saw him in you, I had to face that he was gone. It was easier to pretend you were the problem than to admit I was drowning. Their lawyer stepped in quickly. That's enough. We should go. They left without another word. Dad never looked at me. The aftermath came quickly. Within days, the blog disappeared. Every social media post vanished. Word spread that Dad had been asked to step back from his grief support group after members raised concerns. Mom's therapy practice went on hiatus. The evidence from the legal proceedings had leaked through the family grapevine. Conversations were shifting. People who'd once stayed neutral, or worse, believed their story, started reaching out with halting apologies. Uncle Christopher became my loudest advocate. He didn't just apologize, he acted. He shared the recordings with anyone still clinging to my parents' narrative. He told them plainly, you don't have to like what Lauren's been through, but you need to stop pretending she made it up. Then, 2 weeks later, I got a package. No return address, but I knew the handwriting. Dad. Inside was a small black box and a USB drive. I opened the box first. Mitchell's class ring. I hadn't even known they still had it. My breath caught in my throat. The drive held hundreds of photos. Mitchell and me over the years, birthday parties, Christmas mornings, Tuesday afternoons doing nothing. All the images they said they'd thrown away. But he hadn't. Dad had kept digital copies. No note. No explanation. Just this strange, silent offering. I brought it all to Aunt Celia's that night. We sat with Grandma, scrolling through the images on her laptop. We laughed at Mitchell's dumb faces, cried over the snapshots of our old life. It felt like getting a piece of him back. Something real. A month later, the trust paperwork was finalized. Grandma, Aunt Celia, and Mr. Harrison had structured everything brilliantly. My portion would cover college and living expenses, with more available when I turned 25. Ewan's share was even more protected, only for education and healthcare until he was 18, then released in stages. He'll be okay, Grandma said as we signed the last document. When he's old enough to ask questions, we'll have answers. The truth will be waiting for him. I couldn't see him, not with the restraining orders in place. But Grandma had thought of that, too. She'd created a separate fund for family therapy starting when Ewan turned 16, if he wanted it. If he wanted me. One afternoon, as I was shelving books and wiping down tables, Mrs. Corbin called me into her office. She smiled gently, warm and proud. I'd like to offer you the assistant manager position at the bookstore. The assistant manager promotion meant more than just a new title, it meant stability. The extra income let me scale back a few hours once community college started, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't panicking about money. When my GED scores came back, I cried. Not because I'd passed, I'd known I'd done well, but because I'd done more than survive. I'd earned scores high enough to qualify for several scholarship programs. All that studying in the back of the bookstore, all those nights hunched over flashcards after therapy, it hadn't been in vain. Dr. Martinez celebrated with me during our next session. She didn't just say good job. She saw the deeper meaning in it, the milestone it represented. You're building something, she said, nodding slowly. Not just a career or education. You're building a self. But grief lingered. Not just Mitchell. Not just the trauma. My parents were still alive, still out there, and still pretending I didn't exist unless they needed someone to blame. It's weird. I admitted one day during a session. They're alive. They're just gone. Not in my life. Not in any real way. It's like I'm mourning people who haven't died. That's real grief, Dr. Martinez said gently. And it's valid. She paused before continuing, her voice careful but firm. Sometimes, the healthiest thing is accepting that some relationships can't be repaired. Your job isn't to fix them. It's to build a life where their absence doesn't define who you are. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.